Fresh off of a big win in Detroit, the Jets are going to be facing another road team from the Atlantic Division in Montreal. The Habs have had an interesting start to the season, but so far, so good in terms of their record 4-2-1. What should the Jets expect in Montreal? We'll dive into all of that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on X at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But more than anything, we just really love and appreciate your support. On tonight's episode, obviously, we have plenty to talk about, including Winnipeg's game against Montreal tomorrow evening. But before we go any further, just wanted to let you know this episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and get started today by using promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your very first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and location availability. Now, like I said, obviously the Jets are going to be on the road again. They won't be home until, I believe it is Monday against the New York Rangers. Been a long Friday. Obviously, the Rangers are going to be a really fun game and one that should be a pretty challenging opponent. The Rangers, since Laviolette's taken over, have really started to look more composed, and they're getting pretty good goaltending on top of a well-balanced offense and defense. So, interesting team so far, but the Montreal Canadiens, maybe not quite as strong of an opponent, but still a tough team anyways. They do have a positive record despite a negative goal differential, which always looks really funny. But the Habs, you look at their lineups, and this is not a team that's like super crazy deep. In terms of like matchups, Winnipeg should have the advantage, although when I've said that, it hasn't always panned out that way. But top line for Montreal, Caulfield, Suzuki, and Harvey Pinard, which, it's interesting, right? This is not exactly an elite trio, but Caulfield has been very good. Suzuki has managed to keep pace. I don't know that much about Harvey Pinard, so I can't really speak to his level of play, but I'm not expecting him to be like a franchise level player. I imagine Montreal is trying to balance out the offense a bit and make sure that they are getting, a decently well-rounded top nine. Curiously, the second line is Josh Anderson, Alex Newhook, and Juraj Slafkovsky. Obviously, Slafkovsky has a lot of hype around him, but was also derided a lot by folks who said that he was overdrafted. Anderson, we kind of know from his sort of Tom Wilson-y days. He's not that dissimilar from how Wilson plays, and that he's very physical. He tends to be not as dirty, but he definitely goes for big hits, and he's kind of like a power forward type. Newhook, of course, was acquired relatively cheaply and has so far been fitting in pretty nicely with Montreal. I think that they're thrilled with his early performance. He's, scored a couple of nice goals. Just a generally effective-looking player in a role that I think a lot of people at one point expected him to earn in Colorado, but obviously that didn't really take flight. And since moving to Montreal, he's perhaps gotten a second chance and a second lease on life. The third line, they've got Tanner Pearson, Sean Monahan, and Brendan Gallagher. It's kind of weird to see all three of them in the bottom six because back in the old days, these guys were, in top sixes from their former respective teams. Everyone remembers when Pearson was good for the Kings. Monahan used to be the supposed number one center for Calgary. We know that never really became his role, but as like a third line center for Montreal, I think he should do fine. And of course, Gallagher has been one of Montreal's most consistent attackers, an absolute menace, and kind of like Montreal's answer to Brad Marchand in a way. The fourth line is Jesse Ilonen, Jake Evans, and Michael Pezzetta. Obviously, this is a unit of players. Don't know that there's more to say than that. Obviously, this is this is where the Jets, I think, have a really considerable advantage. Maybe not necessarily with the third line matchup, but like the fourth line matchup, if you throw out Barron, Gustafson, and Kupari out there, that should be a trio that wins this battle against the Evans line. I don't know how they'll match up the opposition on Saturday, but my guess is the Jets should be able to outmatch this Canadiens team. But I will say Detroit gave the Jets a pretty good run for their money, and it's definitely not an opponent here in Montreal that you want to take lightly. They have beaten some okay teams, but they've also had some bad losses, right? They lost to the Wild, they've lost to the Maple Leafs, they've lost to the Devils. So, their wins have come against teams that you would probably say are more on the rebuilding side of things. Washington, Chicago, even Columbus, Buffalo. Some of those teams are supposed to be aspiring for the playoffs, but we know that perhaps that hasn't really been their lot in life recently. So I would say, generally speaking, Montreal doesn't have like a big quality massive victory yet. And that's where I think the Jets have a good advantage after having such a really hard start to the season. Winnipeg should be able to give Montreal more than it can handle, but maybe things play out differently. The Habs defense is interesting. You've got Matheson and Barron on the top pairing, Harrison, Kovacevic on the second, and Shakai and Lindstrom on the third. Now, we all remember Johnny Kovacevic. Obviously, he, for me, was a guy that I would have liked to have seen in a third pairing role for the Jets. I don't know if he would ever have been as effective as he's been for the Habs. I think the way that the Jets play maybe didn't favor his game, but, it's a shame the Jets never got to find out, because now he's with Montreal. He's seemingly done pretty well. I think, given his usage and how they want to use him and the role that he has, he's met expectations, perhaps even exceeded them, and was basically acquired for nothing. So for the Jets, it kind of sucks that Kovacevic was never really given a chance to actually find his game with the Jets. It would have been nice. Leon Gawanke had a similar pathway, though with Gawanke, I honestly didn't see him becoming a full-time NHLer. I felt like he had maybe a few more parts to his game that weren't super well-rounded. But with Kovacevic, I did expect him to be perhaps like a depth defender. But so far, he's been really solid for Montreal. Congrats to him. I'm sure having a successful start to his NHL career with Montreal is probably a great thing to have on his resume, and something that he can finally look back on. But in this game against the Jets, I hope he gets raked over the goals. Let's be real. We want to see goals, and we want to see them for Winnipeg. So let's go Jets, and hope that comes out with a big victory to get the Jets to a 5-3 record. Now, despite, things trending in a more positive direction this season, there are some things involving player usage that have perhaps raised a few flags with not only fans, but also with some of the players themselves. We'll talk about why this could be a problem for the Jets if they don't change it here in just a little bit. But before we go any further, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Jace Medical. Those of you who have ever heard me talk about Jace Medical, you know that when it comes to going out in the field and doing all sorts of exploration, whether you're the kind of person who likes to maybe go on hikes, or you're also the sort of person who maybe does a lot of traveling, you know that at any point in time, something can happen, and the unexpected is always very challenging to manage, especially when you are out in the field and there's not a lot of access to stuff like medical supplies and whatnot. Jace Medical has the perfect answer. They know that at any point in time, you need to empower yourself to take care of any medical emergencies, and that's why they offer the Jace case that comes with 5 essential antibiotics that treat the most common and deadly bacterial infections. You can also customize your kit so it fits your needs exactly, and of course, you can in fact get gift cards for those who maybe could use a little bit of help getting their own Jace case. It's a great option. It's one that is, recommended by plenty of medical professionals. And of course, Jace also offers you lots of post-purchase support, whether it's consultations or continuing supplies. So if you're ready to get started, go to jacemedical.com and enter code LOCKEDON at checkout for a $20 discount on your order. That's promo code LOCKEDON at jasemedical.com. I also wanted to shout out our friends and partners at Parkview. As a As a business owner, you realize that there are times when receivables might fall behind, but that doesn't mean you need to fall behind on vendor payments, payroll, or rent. And for those of you who are small business owners, you know how especially important this can be when you're trying to manage relationships and stay on top of your expenses and all of that fun stuff. That's why for more than 25 years, Parkview Advance has helped businesses secure working capital. From $5,000 to $1.5 million, Parkview Advance can approve your working capital in as little as 24 hours. How handy is that? It's a much easier process than you might think, and we invite the many entrepreneurs that are locked on NHL fans to learn more by calling them at 203-675 0071 or go to parkview.com or parkviewadvance.com. If your business needs working capital, call Parkview Advance today. Parkview Advance, helping businesses with their working capital, so go to parkviewadvance.com. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we talk about some interesting news tidbits recently, with perhaps some Jets players not being as thrilled with their usages as they were expecting, right? Cole Perfetti, I think, is a really good example of somebody who has quite honestly been killing his minutes. The second line that he's been playing on, no matter who's been on that line, has generally performed at an elite level, especially when it comes to defensive performances and chance creation. But you notice that the second line plays among the least of any player grouping on the Jets roster. I don't know why that is. And with Perfetti especially, it's a worrying trend. Cole was kind of promised a big role this year, right? A chance to really steal the second line center spot and cement himself as one of Winnipeg's top contributors. But in just a few games, he's already been moved out to the wing, and he's also been playing like 13 minutes a night, which for me is really unacceptable, especially when he has such a good impact on everything, whether it's offensive creation to defensive performances. You notice that kid is really good at grinding along the walls, stealing the puck, and intercepting passes, and really making plays all over the ice. To say Perfetti is a genius is probably underselling it. He's not only really smart, he works his butt off. And it's crazy to me that when it comes to Perfetti getting benched late in games when they're defending a lead, that it continues to be a trend. You know, Perfetti is actually a guy I trust more than anyone else in the top six. When it comes to his defensive work, his commitment to the forecheck, back check, whatever check you want to say, he does everything. And he also is very skilled with his stick. He's extremely good at stealing the puck. He knows how to thread passes through a lot of high danger traffic. The kid is just, when it comes to players who were blessed with the gifts of the hockey gods, there aren't many guys on this team who come close to what Perfetti can accomplish. And it's why it drives me crazy that for some reason the coaching staff just doesn't use him enough. I really feel like he needs to play a lot more. I think the second line has absolutely pulverized its minutes on a pretty consistent basis. And, you know, it's rare that they have an off night. So for me, I don't understand why Perfetti isn't being used more. And apparently his agent also kind of agrees with this assessment that, you know, he's not being played enough. Perfetti was, you know, told at the start of the year that he would have a chance to get that spot, and there seems to have been some expectation that this would continue through much of the year. But instead, Perfetti's already been relocated on his line, and he's not playing a lot, which is not a good way to build relations with your star young players. Perfetti is, 22 now? At this point, he really needs to be an established NHLer, and it feels like the Jets are still treating him with kid gloves, which you just don't need to. People will say he's undersized, but he's really not. He's not that small. If you notice, he also gets right back up after he gets hit many times. He's very sturdy, relatively speaking, and I feel like he just doesn't get the respect from the coaching staff that he really deserves. And it's not because they think he's a bad player, but they keep thinking his age is something to shelter him from when he's on the ice. But he plays like a guy who's been in the league for years. He's super smart. He knows how to avoid danger. He doesn't often make poor decisions. So for me, I just don't get it. I really feel like among the players on this team who could possibly be underutilized, Perfetti just should not be one of them. He's way too good to keep riding pine, and if the Jets kind of piss him off, that's really not good for retaining the score. I have to say, like, as much as I love Rucker and Lambert and Barlow, none of those guys are sure things. Perfetti is one of the few sure things on this team, and if you alienate him and push him away and make him feel like he should perhaps look elsewhere, you are seriously going to regret it. He is one of the most talented players this franchise has ever drafted, and the last thing the Jets can really afford to do is watch him submit a trade request and want to leave. If he feels like he's not getting the role that he deserves, that's a problem. Now, what I'll say on the flip side of this is that I don't expect it to last. I think at some point the Jets are going to recognize that the best way to make the most of Perfetti is to keep playing him more. Even Scott Arniel in last night's game after it ended said he should have played the second line more. Kind of a strange thing to admit when you consider that he is the head coach, but maybe it'll lead to good things. As long as it makes him recognize that he should be giving these guys more ice time and should be making the most of their presence on the ice, I'm okay with that. Like, I get it. Sometimes you miss a few shifts. Perhaps you're not paying as much attention, and you end up perhaps running out your top six a little bit too much, but neglecting some of the most talented players who can keep you in these games. But, as long as it changes soon, I'm okay with that, but it definitely needs to change, and Perfetti needs to be made one of this team's ice time leaders. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on X. Just know if you say he's undersized, I'm ignoring it. I'll tell you that right off. All that said, though, he's not the only one who's had some weird deployments. I want to talk about some of the odd time distributions and why I feel like for the rest of the team, it's putting some stress on areas that it doesn't need to. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Sleeper. When it comes to the NHL season, a lot of you have probably thought about all of the different possibilities out there. Maybe Mark Scheifele scores a hat trick. Maybe he scores 50 goals. Maybe the Jets even hoist the Stanley Cup. The only way to find out is to actually follow the season. And, of course, you can win big enjoying all of your favorite hockey by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially fantasy hockey. With Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. What's great about it is that it gives you the ability to track all of the biggest players, whether it's McDavid, Scheifele, McKinnon, Morrissey, Ovechkin, Crosby, all the biggest names. And all you have to do is record more or less on your score sheet and beat these Sleeper predictions for things like goals, assists, saves, and so much more in a given game. And to win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, all you have to do is correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Jets fans. You can win 100 times your cash by playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your very first deposit. Terms and conditions do apply. Again, that is code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts of tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you for rejoining us as we talk about a problem that has kind of popped up recently, and it's not a huge one in the short-term scale of things, but in the grand scheme, it could be a problem if it continues, and that is suboptimal line usage. Right? I feel like the Jets haven't really made the most use of 4 effective lines as much as they could. Bones did it in the first couple of games, and then it's sort of tapered off. And Arniel has kind of been, I'd say, not great about doing it. And I really feel like that does a disservice to the team because the bottom 6 for this Jets squad is really good. And it also allows the top 6 to take a breather and also not be out for as many offensive chances against, because let's just say that the top line does not defend well. They get ripped to shreds against opposing top lines and occasionally even depth units because, Kyle Connor doesn't really defend. Scheifele can do it occasionally, but he's not really the kind of guy who's like a Patrice Bergeron, right? He doesn't play that way. And as much as I love Iafallo, he also isn't like a lead defender. And that's not to say that like Ehlers is necessarily, but the thing with like a Nick Ehlers type, is that when he's on the line, it generally means that they dominate offensively in the offensive zone, right? They dominate that possession, they control the game. And so by owning so much offensive possession, that means that they don't even have to defend. It's defense through offense, which is the best kind in my mind. But you look at the bottom six, and at first, Kupari was maybe playing a little too much in some early games. Now he's really not being used that much. And I feel like that isn't ideal when players of his caliber or of Barron's caliber or even David Gustafsson, those guys have done pretty well despite limited minutes. Some of these games, maybe not as sterling, but overall, I think they just need to play more and play with one another so that they're not only getting more ice time, but they're also working with skill. We've seen Gustafsson be a different player when he actually has talent to work with. Big Dave Gus, the bus, has been a beast when he's actually given smart passers or players that he can feed the puck to for easy scoring opportunities. It's this kind of stuff that I feel like the Jets have occasionally gotten away from. And for me, I don't really understand it because Winnipeg has the ability to roll four lines. We've talked about it as being one of this team's big strengths this year. This squad is really friggin' deep at forward. Even with an injury to Velarde, this team still has the firepower to match up against most NHL squads. And that's crazy because Velarde is one of our top players. Even in an early sample size, he's been a beast. And so for the Jets to still win games and outperform their opponents, even without Velarde, is really, really impressive. And I think it speaks to just how deep this top nine is and how good the fourth line has been. But you have to make the most of it and actually use those depth units more. I don't mean that you want to put them out every other shift, but if you can give the top line more rest and soften up the competition with better forechecking or just tiring them out by forcing them to chase the play, that should help Winnipeg significantly because let's be real. We know the top line against counters doesn't defend well. We know the Jets in general do not defend counters well. And so you want to wear down your opponent at the other end of the ice and force them to make mistakes first. If you don't do that, you're going to find yourself kind of struggling to make things happen. And I think that has been a theme of the Jets over the last few years. But, with some smart changes to the time on ice distributions, maybe moving a few pairings here and there, I think that there's a real opportunity to turn this team from being pretty decent to really good. And of course, there are some things that they can't change, like the defense at present actually needs more input from the front office than anything. But I promise you, if you make the right adjustments to distributions for deployments and who's playing, elevated minutes, I think the Jets could come away with some really interesting results, especially guys like Kupari and Barron and Gustafsson, who I think have another gear. I don't think you have to play Lowry and Appleton at the same level, but I mean, if they play more, it's okay. It's not a really big deal. I would definitely like to see more of Niederreiter. But other than that, the main thing is getting that fourth line more involved because that trio is an absolute menace. Kupari is so fast, and he's very effective at getting the puck into the slot. And working with Gustafsson and Barron, who are both smart forecheckers and can create space and also sort of bulldoze their way to the net, it's a really cool combo of players and one that I think the Jets should make the most of every single game. But until they do that, I think the Jets are going to have games where they look perhaps less dominant at 5v5. I really feel like they need to stop relying so heavily on Connor and Scheifele together. I think that pairing, it's a little mid if we're being honest. It may score, but it also concedes lots of opportunities. So let's hope the Jets make the right calls and adjust a few tactics over the next few months. But let me know what you think the Jets should fix. Drop your thoughts in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on X. For tonight's show, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day every day. Be sure to tune in on Monday for thoughts on the game against the Habs and maybe even some coverage of the Rangers game as a preview. But like I said, we'll catch you then. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. And as always, have a great night and go Jets go.